You are good to go, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, June 20th meeting of the City Council for Burlingame. We're calling the meeting to order at 7 o'clock on the dot. With that, I will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. I've asked Councilmember Colson to lead us.
Unmute here. Please stand if you are able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sorry.
Thank you, Councilmember Colson. With that, we will go to roll call. Madam City Clerk, please.
Councilmember O'Brien.
Present.
Councilmember Beach.
Here.
Councilmember Colson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Here, apologies.
Mayor Ortiz.
Here. And then I have a report from a closed session, but I don't believe we had a closed session, so there is no report. For upcoming events, let me just take a moment to recognize that today is the federal holiday for Juneteenth, and we scheduled our meeting prior to that being so. In the future, we will try to avoid it. It's not a reflection of how we feel about the holiday, it was just a simple mistake. And with that, our Parks Director asked me to remind everybody that the community center is now open. For anyone who missed it, we had a great event with many people there. I couldn't stop smiling the whole day. So that was a great day. The Parks and Rec Department has a summer lineup of classes and camps that start this week. There are programs for all ages that can continue through the summer. The next Music in the Park concert will be on July 8th with country band Ryan Scripps Music. I stopped by for the last one. It was a lot of fun. It was all 80s music. It was a lot of fun. I have from Mr. McCulley, our library director. The library will begin this week will work on the HVAC system. It may at times be a little noisier than usual, and some areas will be temporarily closed off, but it will be kept to a minimum and the library will remain open during this process. This will not affect the integrity or safety of the HVAC system, but will make it safer and more responsive when completed. Also, we have a story from one of our employees at the library. It's a 27-year employee, Manuel Carneri, who just received word. He moved here from Italy in 1984 and just received word today or in the last few days that he passed the test and is officially a U.S. citizen. And I'm not going to read the other one. So that's what I have for announcements. Colleagues, anybody else have any announcements or upcoming events? I don't see any. So with that, we'll move on to presentations. I don't think we have any presentations. So we will open it now for public comments. This is the public comments for items that are not on the agenda. If you have comments on items that are on the agenda, just wait for that item to come up and we'll call on you to do that. So with that, Madam City Clerk, do you have any comments for items that are not on the agenda?
Don't have any emails and I don't see anyone with their hand up. So we're good.
Very good. With that, then we'll move on to item number 8, which is approval of the consent calendar. Colleagues, is there anybody wishing to pull any of the items on the consent calendar? Councilmember O'Brien.
Yes, item 8B, and it's just to clarify a couple things.
Very good. Item 8B. Any others, colleagues? Then let's open it to members of the public. Is there any member of the public wishing to pull any of the items?
I also had a member of the public wanting to pull 8B, so we're good.
Very good. That made it easy. And with that, it's no other items. So I'll bring it back to colleagues and I will entertain a motion to approve the remaining items. That would be items number 8A, C, D, E, F, G, and H, and I.
Either one. I'll take a second.
Okay, let's go with motion by Councilmember Beach, second by Councilmember Colson. Could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember O'Brien.
Yes.
Councilmember Beach.
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brownrigg,
Yes.
Mayor Ortiz.
Yes, and then with that, we'll go back to item number 8B. And do we want to do staff report before, or do you?
No, I don't think we need to do staff report. Is Segal on the line?
So Segal couldn't make it tonight, but Michael, Syed, Kevin, and I are all here to answer questions.
Okay, so I actually talked with her earlier, but just in case maybe anyone else was a little bit confused with the staff report. So it's Burlingame is doing its own proposal, right? And then Millbrae's doing a separate proposal. That was my understanding.
For the RFP, it's a joint RFP.
The RFP is joint, but to apply for the grant, I thought they were each doing their own.
So we are, sorry, go ahead, Michael. You probably have better intel than I do.
Sorry, yes, that's correct, council member. Each agency is applying for a grant separately. So they're independent of each other.
Right, thank you. So then that means each, let's say we everything goes great and each city is granted something. So it'd be 200,000 for each city, and then each city then pays 20,000 each as their match. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I had that straight. All right. And then on that note, I'm good with it.
Okay, colleagues, any other questions? And having none, then we will open it to members of the public for comment.
Yeah, I received an email from Manito on this one. He says, I wanted to ask and learn two things about the item. Firstly, how will bicyclist detection be improved exactly? I've never had a problem getting detected by the signals here on a bike or in a car. I know there was support among advocates and users for the general idea of improving the way signals pick up bike riders, but there was a whole list of intersections that had problems worse than these, like Cadillac/Rollins or Carolyn/Broadway, or on either side of the PED Bike 101 overpass. How were these intersections selected when there are others with actual verifiable problems? Was BPAC or Teaspoon asked which locations to choose? Secondly, how will this $173,000 project work to improve traffic flow and congestion? If it's merely improving bike detection, how does that improve traffic? They already detect vehicles fine. And if these are the same cameras that were installed on Broadway/California, then they really don't improve traffic. So how will this improve traffic specifically? Thank you in advance for learning about these two and how they are justified as the best and highest use of precious public funds.
Excellent. Now, it seems like quite a bit of questions there that I'm not sure if there's a quick answer. Is there somebody who can have a quick answer for Mr. Velasco, or should we just take that offline?
Mr. Mayor, I'll be happy to answer some of the questions, if that's okay with you. Thank you. The video detection system chosen on this corridor was because of the bike ped master plan, identifying California Drive to be the most, the highest priority project. And concurrent with this grant application, staff is working on applying for California Drive bike grant application for OBAG 3 grant and other grants as well. So the city is able to secure those grants, and this will help us pay for the signal upgrades for the video detection system. That's how it will help. And with regards to why other projects were selected, because they were not identified as the grant projects. So we're looking for maximizing the grant opportunities for multiple grants, and that was the reason.
Thank you, Mr. Martuza, and thank you, Mr. Velasco, for the comment. With that,
Nope, we also have a hand up, Mr. Mayor, from Sandra. So
very good.
we'll allow her to speak.
Perfect. Good evening, Ms. Lang. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. And I read this, the resolution that which incorporates 3 sub-resolutions. I think that it's quite impressive. If that's the right word. Yes, it's a lot of money, but part of Measure W was intended for a lot of the purposes that are outlined in the various resolutions. I don't really have a question, but at first I was going to ask about the video thing, but I think I understand that. But what I see is a lot of cross benefits about traffic, reducing traffic congestion between the three particular resolutions that are part of the overall request for this grant thing. And also to bear in mind that the city, as I read this, only needs to come up with a matching amount for each particular area. So yes, it's a lot of money, but I do have a certain amount of faith actually in the implementation of the Measure W funds, which were voted on in, I believe, in 2018. So that's my comment about it.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Lang. Madam City Clerk, do we have any other public comment?
No, that's it.
Having none, then I will bring it back to my colleagues for any final comments or to make a motion. Colleagues? No.
Make a motion. Go ahead. Or Anne, do you want to make a motion since you
Oh,
both?
go ahead. No, that's fine.
Okay, I will make a motion to approve item, is it 8B?
Correct.
8B,
Second.
please.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Coulson, a second by Councilmember O'Brien. And with that, do we have a roll call? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Beach, you have your hand raised.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment. I want to thank staff for the heads up play. There's more money than ever available in bike ped improvements with Measure W and Measure A right now. And it's just great to see us putting forth projects so that we get an opportunity to be eligible for those. So thanks for the hard prep work to go into this. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Back to my motion. I have a motion by Councilmember Coulson and a second by Councilmember O'Brien. And if we could have a roll call, please.
Councilmember O'Brien.
Aye.
Councilmember Beach.
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Yes.
Mayor Ortiz.
Yes. And with that, we will move on to item number 9A, which is a public hearing and introduction of an ordinance to place a revenue measure on the November 2022 ballot to increase and modernize the business license tax on the November 2022 ballot, and or introduction of an ordinance to place a revenue measure on the November 2022 ballot to impose a gross receipts tax on cannabis business that operate or provide services within Burlingame, seek with determination exempt pursuant to, okay, we don't have to say that. So with that, I believe, is that our city manager?
That is me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm going to ask you to read that title 3 times fast now.
Thank you. I'll work on it.
Right. So I think, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. I'll give the staff report and then we'll go through the whole clerk piece of it, right? Okay, great. I don't ever do ordinances. This is a new one. Actually, I did it once before. So this is a bit complicated the way it's laid out. It will make sense if you just give me a moment to try to explain it all. So we're here to talk about 3 different revenue measure options and determine if the council wants to proceed with one or more of the revenue options. So the first measure, it's listed as option A in your staff report, would increase the business license tax from the current flat rate of $100 annually for every single business in town to a rate ranging from $200 to $750. And it's actually 3 tiers. So it's $200 for the smallest businesses, $300 for the middle businesses, and $750 for the largest businesses. So that's option A. Option B would increase the business license, just like I described, and would also add a 5% gross receipts tax on any commercial cannabis businesses operating in Burlingame. And I'll go through and explain that a little bit. And then option C is only the 5% gross receipts tax on cannabis. So one is business license only, one is cannabis only, and the middle option combines the 2. So we have all those ordinances here and all that good official stuff that Megan will do. I'm going to go into a little bit of the background. As you're all well aware, because we did our budget at the last meeting and we had a budget study session in May, We are not alone in facing some economic challenges brought about by the pandemic and the current national downturn. You'll all recall that once upon a time, we made about $29 million in our transient occupancy tax or our hotel tax. That went down to 5.7 million in the middle year of the pandemic. And we are slowly crawling back out of that. Our sales tax has done okay. Had a little bit of a dip earlier. It's doing okay. Our property tax is great. But our hotel tax used to be our largest revenue source by far, and now it's our third. So that was just a really significant downturn. Costs are going up. We have inflation. There's just a lot that's impacting our budget. So this council and this staff are very fiscally responsible. We rarely add headcount to the mix. So staff members, we rarely add. We try to keep a lid on spending. I myself am a cheapskate, and I think I've imparted that to my colleagues. We try to be very prudent about how we spend the public's dollars. That being said, we're just these circumstances that hit us all starting in March of 2020 really hurt our budget, and so we have been wrestling with how to deal with that. At the same time, we have a very ancient business license tax structure. So the business license tax has been in place since 1978. So quite some time ago. It was last increased from $75 flat rate annual tax to $100 on July 1st, 1993. So almost 30 years ago, quite a long time ago. And as we know, we have had a little thing called inflation since 1993, and this business tax has been kept at the same rate all this time. So the council had a number of study sessions. We had one back in September of 2021, looking at kind of a menu of options for tax measures. We came back in February 22nd of 2022 with another study session. And at that point, we were focusing a lot more heavily on possible business license tax structures with an eye toward making the tax more equitable. Right now, everybody in the city that pays a business license pays the same amount. So your dry cleaner, your corner store, they all pay the same as the auto dealers, the Apple store, the Meta campus, which is what Facebook's new name is. Everybody pays the same. So we're looking at ways to make things a little bit more equitable and also raise some revenue for the city. So we talked about it in February. We had a structure that was based on gross receipts, was a little bit complicated. The council was sort of wrestling with a lot of different models. We asked our business license tax consultant to help us refine those. So we brought HDL in. They do sales tax and business license tax for us. We asked them to refine those models and come back with some additional models. And even those were they were really hard, I think, for all of us to kind of wrap our heads around how we might structure the tax. And not just structure it, because the structuring actually is sort of the easy piece. It was, how do we explain it? If we're going to go out to the public and say, hey, there's this new tax on the ballot, here's what it is and how it works. It was a little bit complicated to try to have a good message that the layperson can understand. We, with a lot of work, can go, okay, yeah, I get it. But we work with this kind of thing all the time. And most people don't. They get a bill once a year. And it's like, what is this? How does this work? It would be just a little bit troubling. So the messaging around that was a little complicated. So at that April 4th council meeting, council, you gave us direction to proceed with a 3-tier tax structure. So it's making it a little bit more equitable, not kind of the uber equitable structure that we would get out of a gross receipts tax, where we tax different categories of businesses, different rates. But this one does help. So businesses, the smallest businesses, so those making under $250,000 a year would pay $200 a year. So one-time annual $200. Medium-sized businesses, so the 250 up to just under $1 million, 250,000 to just under $1 million in annual gross receipts would pay $300 per year, and then $1 million and above would pay $750. We asked HDL to help us figure out what those tiers, which businesses would go in the little category, the medium category, the big category, and they came up with the 250, below 250, 250 to $1 million, and $1 million and above. They helped us come up with that. And you can see in your staff report on page 3, how many businesses, now this is an estimate, and obviously it will change every year based on how many businesses we have, how they're doing. But most of our businesses fall under that under 250. So most of our businesses are the little guys. So just over 3,700 businesses at a rate of $200 annually would raise 742,000 and change. Hi, puppy. My dog is now going to start to bark. Councilmember Brownrigg or Vice Mayor Brownrigg, that's my girl. Sorry. She heard your puppy, Vice Mayor. So medium businesses, we have 1,769. So that's 530,000 approximately. And the bigger businesses, these are over $1 million. We have 355. And again, these are all estimates. So at a rate of 750, that would raise just over $250,000. So the total of all of that is just over 1.5 million. So we did all of that work. We, at the council's request, and because it's good due diligence and what we do whenever we consider any kind of ballot measure, we engage the services of a professional polling company. So we hired Godby Research to help us. It's an independent public opinion research firm. They actually are based here in Burlingame, and their principal, Brian Godby, is well familiar with Burlingame. He actually knew our old rec center as a kid. His grandma lived here, so he understands Burlingame and he gets it. And he helped us when we did the Measure I tax, which is really great because he had that history to pull back and say, you know, how did Burlingame feel back in 2016, 2017 when we polled on Measure I? How are you doing now? So getting kind of that longevity look was super helpful. So Godby Research went out and polled our voters back in May of 2020 and came up with, you know, what do people support and what were the top priorities? So the top priorities from our voters, probably not very surprising: maintaining and repairing city streets and sidewalks before they become more expensive to repair, enhancing neighborhood police patrols and crime prevention programs, undergrounding overhead power lines and supporting fire prevention programs. I think we can all understand where that came from with all the fires lately and, you know, how scary that can be. And then supporting other general city services. So we looked at all of that with Godby Research, and we recommend that the council consider going forward with the business license tax. So this would be a general tax. So it's a 50% plus one measure. If is approved by the voters, it would modernize our business license tax structure. It's not, you know, going as far as doing a gross receipts tax is, but it does, you know, do some tiering so everybody doesn't pay the same. The largest businesses are paying more, the smallest businesses are paying less. It will help us somewhat fund some of our top priorities. The money is locally controlled. It does not get taken away by the state, which other revenue sources do get taken by the state. So this one is a nice one. It's all ours to use for these good public purposes. And then we would spend it on these types of programs. Again, as a general tax, we can't say we're spending, you know, $1,000 here, 2,500 there. We can't come up with an exact expenditure plan. Once you do that, you've turned your tax into a special tax, and this is a general tax. So we can say these are kind of the menu of types of things that we would spend the money on. And so Ordinance A, which is in your packet, and you have two versions of it. You have a clean version and a red line version showing what we would strike and what we would add. Hopefully I got all the changes back and forth on all these different ordinances. But as Michael told me, we can fix it at the meeting if we need to. But Ordinance A would do this modernizing the business license tax with the 200, 300, 750. So that's what Ordinance A is. Separately, back in 2021, early 2021, the council adopted an ordinance allowing for non-storefront cannabis retail delivery. And you said 4 is our max. We can have up to 4 of these businesses located within the city limits. These are, so people who are maybe watching aren't concerned about this. These are basically warehouses, no signage, no customers walking up and buying anything. This is just a place where people pick up the cannabis and then they take it in their delivery vehicle and they deliver it somewhere to people who have ordered it. And so it's not like, you know, if you drive to some cities where you see a big sign saying, come here, get your cannabis, it's not that. So they'll be pretty underground. We know where they are. They are permitted. They're safe. They're just fine, but they're not going to be, you know, splashing big neon headlights saying, come here, buy your cannabis here. So the council had expressed some interest, and one of the reasons you considered allowing this cannabis retail delivery is that one of the representatives for one of the companies that was talking about coming to Burlingame talked about this revenue option that, you know, if we do this, we can tax the revenues, and said it would bring in about $1 million a year from just one of the businesses. So that's, you know, pretty tempting. So again, I mentioned that we can have up to 4 right now. One business has received what they need. So they have an operator permit and they have their conditional use permit. So now they're probably building out their space. I don't know exactly when they plan to open their doors, not to the public, but they're basically on their way. We have another business that has its operator permit under review. So they haven't been issued that yet. They have not submitted their conditional use permit application yet. So they're a little bit farther behind, but that means, within the next year or so, we should have 2 operators, and maybe some other ones will come along as well. So option B would do the business license tax that I discussed above, and it would add on to that a tax of 5% gross receipts on commercial cannabis activity. What's interesting about this one, and this was a very smart move by our city attorney, is the 5% is the max that it could be. But if you decided, hey, this is, a new industry, we want to see how they're doing, you could adopt a resolution to go lower if you were so inclined. You can't adopt a resolution to go higher, but you could always say, we're going to go lower. And then you could go, okay, we gave them a break for the first year, for instance, but now we want to go back up to the cap. You can always adopt a resolution to go up to the cap. So there's a little bit of wiggle room. One of the reasons to do that is because we're not quite sure how these businesses were due. And also, we just took a stab at a tax rate. 5% is in line with what other cities are doing. It's not the highest, it's not the lowest, it's kind of right in the mix of it all. But we just thought, 5% seemed like a nice round number. So that's the number we put in there. But if you decide, council, that, hey, that's not the number we want, you can either direct us tonight to go to a different number, or you can say, let's see how it goes. And by resolution, if this passes, by resolution, we'll set a different number. So again, Ordinance A is the business license tax and the cannabis tax. And then Ordinance C is just the cannabis tax. So you have like these 3 different options for how it all could work. And the reason we did it this way is we weren't sure if you wanted to go forward with any of them, and if so, which ones you wanted to do. So if you just wanted a business tax and you said, we don't want to touch cannabis right now, then option A is your choice. If you say, we want to do cannabis, business and cannabis, but we think they should be separate tax measures, we gave you that option. And if you say, hey, we only want to go once, let's do it all in one fell swoop, that's option B. And so that's what we have. So in your staff report on page 4, you have 3 different ballot questions, one for Ordinance A, one for Ordinance B, one for Ordinance C. They all meet the 75-word limit. And if people are counting and wondering why we say they meet the 75-word limit, City of Burlingame counts as 1 word in the bizarre world of ballot measure counting. So they all meet the 75-word limit. Megan, who is our expert at elections and ballot measures and whatnot, did an extra count for us just to make sure we were where we needed to be. So these questions were designed with Brian Godby with Godby Research and our consultant from TBWBH Props and Measures, helping us think through what was the best way to draft these questions so that they would be palatable and understandable to the public. Because again, this is not, when we did Measure I, it was like, should we or should we not raise the sales tax by 0.25%? Like that's fairly easy to say. So this one, we had to talk about the rate. So the rate is a range of 200 to 750, or it's the 5% gross receipts tax. We had to talk about some idea of how the money would be spent. We had to talk about the audits, the funds staying in Burlingame, all of that. So these ballot measure questions check all those boxes. So they do what we need them to do. And there's just 3 options for you. So I'm going to finish in 1 second. I know Council Member O'Brien has her hand up. If you decide to go forward, we'll do all the stuff that Megan does. So you'll introduce and subsequently approve 1 or more of the ordinance. So we'll introduce the ordinance, one or two ordinances tonight. And then on July 5th, you'll come back and you'll approve them. And at that meeting, Megan will also do a report calling for the election for November 8th. And then there's a timeline in your staff report with all the other stuff. We have to file the measure with the county by August 12th, which is before you come back from recess, which is why we have everything going now and July 5th. And then there's the for and against arguments. If anybody wants to write a for, hopefully none of you want to write an against argument. You would do rebuttal arguments if those were necessary. Michael gets to do some work beyond all the good stuff he did for me late last week. He does the impartial analysis, and then the election happens. As a reminder, once the council does, if you decide to go forward and you vote to put something on the ballot on July 5th, then city staff can do informational updates to the community. We can't do any advocacy whatsoever. So once it's on the ballot from the city, the city council has done what they need to do, you voted, we can't do any advocacy on the city staff side. We can say, $1.5 million perhaps would be raised from a business license tax. It could be used for the following types of things, or the cannabis tax could raise $1 million for, per business, but we can't then say, and you should vote for it. Isn't that great? We can't do any of that. So, and we are very thoughtful about how we proceed at the staff level, because what we don't want is for the staff to make some silly mistake and go, yay, vote for it at a public meeting. And then we've just, tanked the whole thing and created a big problem for everybody by making that silly mistake. So we're going to be very clear about what we can and can't do to make sure we don't violate any of those rules. Finally, just in terms of how much all of this would raise. So our current business license tax for the upcoming fiscal year, which starts in 11 days, would raise about $800,000. We think this structure would raise just over 1.5. So it's about a $700,000 difference. So an additional $700,000 from the business tax. And again, the cannabis tax, we've been told by one of the operators that it's about $1 million with a 5% gross receipts tax. So that's for one business. 2 businesses, 2 million. If we ever get to 4 businesses, perhaps 4 million, but maybe they cannibalize each other a little bit. So maybe it's not actually $1 million per. With that, I have been talking for quite some time, so I'm going to be quiet. Brian Godby is here on the call with us if we have any questions for him. And if not, I'm happy to answer any questions along with Michael. So I will stop now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam City Manager. And I see Councilmember O'Brien has a question.
Yes. So one question might mess up your word count. So looking at ordinance B and the verbiage there, where it says 5% of gross receipts for cannabis, in parentheses, marijuana businesses, providing approximately 2.5 million annually. What I'm a little concerned about for people, voters, reading this, it doesn't say non-retail, because I don't want people to make the assumption that we're doing retail cannabis and then they automatically vote no.
Right. So
I'm not sure if that can be reworded at all and be within the word count.
I think that's a great question. I think I'm going to ask Brian. Megan, if you could bring Brian Godby over to help us with this. One thing I will say is right now, all we allow is non-retail, the delivery. But at some point in the future, the council could decide, a future council could decide, hey, we do want to allow nurseries, on the other side of the bay, indoor nurseries or something. And so this would allow for other types of cannabis businesses if the council wanted to go there in the future. If you narrow it, then you can't do that.
Yeah, I know. I see what you're saying, but I bet a lot of people may not know what our policy is and jump to the conclusion we're allowing retail, and then that does have a negative effect for many constituents in the city.
Awesome.
So
I mean, I
just wanted to bring it up. So
yeah, no, I appreciate that. Megan, Are you trying to bring Brian over?
I'm having difficulties bringing him over.
So can I just say, can I promote to panelist?
Yeah.
Oh, here he comes.
Okay, there we go.
Brian, do you have any thoughts on that? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I don't think it hurts so you'd want to add the word non-retail. I don't think that hurts the measure in any way. And I was just trying to skim through here, looking to see where we might cut a word.
Other terminology you can incorporate. I just feel that yes, our policy doesn't allow it, but I bet there are many constituents that don't know that and might just jump to that conclusion that we're allowing retail. However, I understand where the city manager is coming from futuristically. That may change. And so you kind of want everything covered. So I don't know what the answer is. That's why I'm bringing
That's
it
why
up.
we have Brian here.
Yeah, I think it's fine to add that. it's not going to hurt it. I think it actually makes it better reading through it again this evening. Gross receipts for cannabis, you could clearly put non-retail right in front of there. As long as non-retail hopefully is one word, and I hope the city attorney agrees with that. I guess it'd be hyphenated. I'm still looking for a place that we were providing approximately. I mean, the term approximately in front of 2.5 million. Again, this is up to the city attorney, but the state law doesn't really speak to that. It just says how much does it raise, and that had, so the amount has to be in there, but no qualifiers. So the word approximately could potentially come out. You could also say all funds staying local instead of in Burlingame. And I think, since this is a Burlingame measure, people would know that staying local means Burlingame. I don't think that would hurt it either.
Thanks, Brian.
Sure.
Okay, so I think I agree with that point. So I'm going to bring it to Vice Mayor Brownrigg. You have a question?
I do. I appreciate Councilwoman O'Brien flagging that issue. That was one of my questions, so I appreciate the conversation. I don't think we all want to wordsmith everything, but I was curious, if you have to save a word, why not just get rid of marijuana? So it's non-retail cannabis businesses. I'm not sure why we say it twice. I'll let you stew on that, Brian, but that seems to me to be an easy fix. I guess I'm interested in the discussion, or if you could comment, Brian, on the choice of a combined measure that's a single measure, that's option B, or the option that is you put both A and C on the ballot. And is that likely? Is, if you took that second course, are you more likely to end up with 2 no's, or what do the consultants think about that choice?
That good question, council member. I think that keeping it simple is always the best rule, and so 1 is better than 2. And I think there is a possibility that 2 people could pick and choose, which is the one that I'm least likely to pay, and that's the one I'll support. Having said that, we're in a similar situation in 2020 in San Bruno. We tested a TOT, and then we discovered that the council was interested in a cannabis tax as well. And so we wound up putting 2 measures on the ballot, and they did both pass. So because the TOT and a cannabis are 2 business taxes in San Bruno, and this is a business tax, business license tax, and a cannabis tax, I think they probably work the same way as it did in San Bruno. So I don't think it would be terrible if there was 2. I just think being simpler is always better. And to answer your suggestion, in San Bruno, we actually called it a marijuana tax rather than a cannabis tax, because we sort of went the other way, because everybody knows what marijuana is, right?
Well, so it seems to me you can go either way, but you don't. But to have both is redundant if you're really scouting for words. And I'll close with this and hand it over to Councilman Colson. But one of the advantages of doing 2 measures is you're able to get more of the subtlety in there and the wording. So, for example, with respect to the cannabis, that we don't permit retail cannabis, perhaps there'd be something worth adding. But I'm interested in the idea of 2 versus 1. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Colson.
Thank you. So I guess having worked on a couple of these in the past, a lot of the persuasion of voters does not happen in reading this particular piece of information. Usually the voters have been persuaded through your mailers, through your knocking on doors, through your meetings, through the advocacy of who is endorsing your work. So I would I would be okay with it clarifying it. I'm a little worried that even maybe non-retail, I don't know if that even just creates more, I don't know, but I think you could educate your voters along the way. And that is how you would handle, we don't do, we do state conforming marijuana delivery service system, and you can work through it that way. So I'm not as apprehensive about all this as maybe others are, just because I know how it's worked in the past. So I'm very flexible. We can do whatever we want to do, but I don't think we should not make a decision or get too worried about it, because I think we can fix it.
Okay, guys, let's keep it to questions. We'll do our comments later. So Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and appreciate the presentation from the city manager tonight. I was interested in something I didn't pick up on when I read the ordinances, but that you'd mentioned that the wording in the actual letter of the ordinance is cannabis sets a tax rate not to exceed 5% of annual gross receipts. So that it's that language that gives us the flexibility to go up to 5%. But if for some reason we wanted to go 3%, okay. And apparently we don't need to say that language of any kind in the ballot description. Okay.
So I would imagine it would be in the impartial analysis.
Got it.
Probably, but not in the ballot measure question, which is the 75-word statement.
Got it. Okay. And that language not to exceed is consistent in all three versions, A, B, and C.
It's not in A because A.
Oh yeah, because A doesn't have it. Sorry, B and C. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
So B and C have the exact same language. They're just in different places.
Right.
Because if you do B, there's certain things in the business license part of the Muni code that have to go away because they're superseded by the new business license. So it's the exact same chunk of language, hopefully, as I was cutting and pasting. They just start with, they have a different like chapter 6.08, different point, whatever is different.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I forgot one of my other questions, which is, can you remind us how we calculate gross receipts? And by that, I mean, not how do we calculate it, but do we require everybody who has a business license to report on their gross receipts? And then how do we validate that? And how do we guide people? So as just one simple example, I have always gotten a business license, even though my company is based in Washington, D.C., because I had the impression that I had to have a license to be a remote office. And now I'm wondering, like, okay, so what am I supposed to do at the end of every year? Do I report? Like, how do we do this mechanically?
Yeah, so it's the value of the work done in Burlingame. So most of what happens for you, it sounds like, is not actually, like, the business itself is not in Burlingame, but I'm going to ask our finance director, because she would know much better than I do how this all works.
Thank you. And I don't mean to make this about me. I'm just trying to use an example.
No, but just in general, right?
Oh,
So when we were talking about, businesses that had more than one location, like, how does that work? It was the location that's within Burlingame, not the full suite or the full complement of all the businesses that are, like the Apple Store, for example. We have one Apple Store, so it's the value of the business that one Apple Store does, but it doesn't take into account the Apple Store at Hillsdale, the Apple Store at Palo Alto, or any of that other stuff.
And I'll let Helen speak, but I do think merchandise is a lot easier to track than services.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Helen?
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, it's we more count about the business happened in our jurisdiction. For example, if your business in different location, you come here, then you consider outside contractor as only activity happening in this area.
What does a bank do if it makes a loan to a Millbrae business? Is that Burlingame revenue or Millbrae?
But if the bank is located in Burlingame,
It'll be Burlingame revenue?
Yeah.
And we would work with HDL to help us figure all of this out. So they do this elsewhere. It's new for us figuring out all the gross receipts, but it's not new for everyone else. most other cities that have a business license tax do it based on gross receipts. So there are lots of folks out there who know how to figure out all the nuances. Like you said, merchandise is really easy. If you go buy, a shirt from Athleta, like we know that's this one shirt and that led to this much in profit and gross receipts, but the consultants, the contractors, all who are, have business elsewhere, it's a little bit more difficult. And so that's why we call in the experts to help us tease that all out.
Great, thank you. Council Member Colson.
And how are remote workers? Does a remote worker have to get a business license?
Well, that's kind of what Michael is.
Well, it's a little different because what Michael's saying is he has an office that he's set up essentially in Burlingame. And what I'm saying is, my office is in San Francisco, but I'm allowed to work remotely 3 days a week in Burlingame at my home office.
For that case, you will do not need unless you, for example, if you do some investment or stuff, consult a Burlingame resident or other, you have client base in Burlingame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I have a quick question. I kind of was intrigued by what somebody said. So changing the wording on the gross receipts for marijuana delivery businesses. In my mind, I don't know if that would address the whole retail thing in your mind, Councilmember O'Brien. If instead of saying receipts for cannabis, marijuana businesses, we would say receipts for marijuana delivery businesses.
That sounds fine to me, but I would defer to Mr. Gobby or our city attorney on the best language to use.
And then recognize that constrains us in the future. We'd have to pass a new
Correct.
ordinance if we wanted to expand beyond delivery.
Right. Any thoughts, Brian?
Although if you do non-retail, that actually would be a little more global. Because then if you, let's say, had warehouse for, development, and, science and with marijuana, that would fall into that.
Okay.
Rather
that
than,
makes sense.
I think yours is a little more specific.
Okay, that makes sense. Yes. Brian, any thoughts?
Yeah. Off the top of my head, the non-retail sort of is also a land use term, right? And it sort of says it's not on Burlingame Avenue or on Broadway. And I think that's probably important here. So I think the delivery business loses that because a delivery business, there are restaurants on Burlingame Avenue that deliver food, right?
Right.
So I think the non-retail would rule out those retail zoned areas, which I think is part of the intent here. Obviously, that's the council's choice, not mine, but that's sort of my read on it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And Megan just let me know that non-retail is considered 2 words. So we have to bear that in mind as we're counting.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we can talk about that when we're in comments. Any other questions, colleagues, before we have the titles read?
Yeah, Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
I apologize. I just want to go back to the reporting. So does everybody who has a business license have to report their gross receipts? Is that the way it works?
Not currently.
Not currently, yeah.
Well, not currently. I know not currently. But I mean,
Right. So in the future, I believe that's the way it works, that they would have to report their gross receipts.
Yep, that's correct.
So the application would include a line that said my total gross receipts are blah, blah, blah. And therefore I'm paying in this category.
And it's the honor system, unless you get audited or something by the city.
Yes.
I guess I don't think these mechanics are unimportant. For me, the amount of money that we're asking people to pay is relatively trivial, but the red tape that might go with it, that's the part that concerns me. And red tape on a lot of small businesses that have really not, filling out forms is not their strength. It's just, that's the part that I'm trying to get my hands around. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that we could look at the example from other cities that use gross revenues. And I don't know why I have in my mind that I've seen one of those, maybe because I filled one out at some point for some bank that I worked in. And it was fairly simple, but I'll let somebody else answer that question. Councilmember Colson.
So, but I just want to ask, gross receipts is just what they're going to file on their IRS form. Is that correct?
Well, you go back to the example that Michael was bringing up earlier. If you're just one part of the business that sits in Burlingame, you're going to, at your discretion, have to be able to divide that and allocate a certain portion of what's on your, 1120. So yes,
But this is, but this is the way that all the other cities do it, I take it?
I don't know the answer to that. I believe it is, but so does anybody know?
I just really quickly put up the chart that we had in one of our staff reports. I think it was the April staff report. This shows what all the other cities do. So Belmont's in the process of figuring out if they're going to change theirs to a gross receipts tax. So that may appear on the November ballot. Almost all the other ones are gross receipts with a couple of exceptions. So what we can do, if the council decides to go forward, we can figure out the answers to these questions and let you know for the July 5th meeting. I don't think it's a make or break for whether you want to proceed with a tax, what the mechanics are of how people pay that revenue in the future. So that's my suggestion, is that we do a little due diligence and look up the ordinances for, a few of these cities, and we can let you know, because it's probably in their ordinance, or it's in their form they have to fill out. Like, here's how I report it, if that's okay.
Okay, colleagues, any other questions before we have the reading? Okay, and then with that, then I'm going to ask the city clerk to read the title of the ordinances. All three of them.
All right, starting with Ordinance A, for the first one, an ordinance of the City of Burlingame amending Chapter 6.04 and Chapter 6.08 of Title 6 of the Burlingame Municipal Code to increase and modernize the business license tax. CEQA determination exempt pursuant to state CEQA guidelines, Section 15378, 15601B3. Ordinance B says an ordinance of the City of Burlingame amending Chapter 6.04 and Chapter 6.08 of Title 6 of the Burlingame Municipal Code to increase and modernize the business license tax and impose a cannabis business tax. CEQA determination exempt pursuant to state CEQA guidelines, Section 15378, 15601B3. And then the last ordinance, an ordinance of the City of Burlingame amending Chapter 6.04 and Chapter 6.08 of Title 6 of the Burlingame Municipal Code to impose a cannabis business tax. CEQA determination exempt pursuant to state CEQA guidelines, Section 15378, 15601B3.
Thank you.
Make a motion to waive further reading and introduce the three proposed ordinances.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember O'Brien, a second by Vice Mayor Brownrick to waive the further reading. Could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember O'Brien? Yes. Councilmember Beach?
Yes.
Councilmember Colson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brownrick?
Yes.
Mayor Ortiz?
Yes. And with that, we'll move on to public comment. So, Madam City Clerk, do we have any members of the public wishing to comment on the proposed ordinance?
We do. I'll start with some of the emails I got. We got an email from John Pivorato. He says, how in good conscience can you recommend a 100% increase in 1 year following the COVID pandemic? Yes, the City of Burlingame is not receiving the revenue you had pre-COVID, but that shall come back by other means than the increased business license fee. What about the businesses that went through the same? Will they be able to come back? Is adding an additional burden on them at this time being a good partner? I think not, and I think you should rethink how and why you're about to gouge the businesses in our town. We also got an email from Sarah. She says, many small independent businesses, especially personal services, are still struggling to recover from being forced to close during 2020. Personal care services were closed the longest and lost enormous revenue. Many continue to pay current high rents and rent in arrears, plus substantially higher PG&E rates that both eat into a very tight bottom line already. There was a recent raise in sales tax to help the city budget. Note, not every business received huge PPE assistance to help maintain business costs in 2020. Strongly dispute that the city raised the business license fee any more than $100, which seems more than fair for any small business that is not on Burlingame Ave. Big box stores can easily remit a higher fee. Their sales are far, far higher. Okay, there's that one. And then John Kavranian, the president of the Burlingame Bid, wrote in that on Thursday, June 16th, the Broadway Bid board members had their monthly meeting, and we were briefed on the business license fee proposal. One, those making less than $250,000 is $200 a year. Those making $250,000, between $250,000 and $999,999 is $300 a year, and those making $1 million or more is $750 a year. After reviewing the proposal, the Broadway Bid board members voted to endorse and support the proposal. Gerald, who you guys got, or council got the email from, but he has asked that I read it during the meeting as well, stated, I took a look at the proposed license fees and wondered if it was incomplete. I have a small business and much of the revenue I take in is tax. That seems to put me in the top license fee bracket. Should a company handling 5 or 10 million or more be asked to contribute a bit more? Does it seem fair to have a small business with 2 full-timers and 2 part-timers to pay Burlingame the same license fee as a company with dozens or hundreds of employees? Have you considered a base license fee with add-ons for the number of staff members? I saw a city outside of Portland, which seemed to have an attractive pricing plan, and he included that pricing plan. And he said, as for the chart I saw on with the fee schedule, are there really only 355 businesses in town doing upwards of $1 million? How is that calculated and verified? We also have a hand up from John Martos.
And welcome, Mr. Martos.
Mayor, good evening, council. I just have an opinion about combining these 2 taxes into one measure. As I read through this and I hear the discussions and the debate, the business license tax seems fair, equitable. I like the way it's structured. I don't hear as much controversy trying to clarify that tax as I do the cannabis tax. And you know, I understand that these are going to be protected areas where these are cannabis is sold and no storefronts, but the general voter may not understand that. And to combine the 2 measures into one ordinance that'll be voted on by the citizens of Burlingame may be a disadvantage, and there may be more risk of one being voted down and then carrying the other one down where the other one could be favorable. So it's my opinion, and it's up to council, obviously, that the 2 should be separated as A and C when it goes forward to the ballots. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martos.
And I don't see anyone else with their hand up, so you're good to go.
Very good. Thank you. So colleagues, I'm going to bring it back for final comments, and let's find a way to move forward here. So I personally like the combining them. And I just want to answer to some of the public comment. When we came up with this very simplified version where we only have the 3 tiers, it was a compromise. I think some of the people who wrote in would not have been very pleased with what some of the options that we were exploring otherwise. So I think, again, this was a compromise. we limited the tiers and the categories because what we had before was extremely complicated. And so we all agreed that this was a much simpler version and easier to put forth in front of the voters. So I'm comfortable with our structure. I wish it would be a little higher, but I think this makes sense to move forward. So colleagues, anybody have any thoughts? Not all at once. Councilmember Colson.
Thank you. So just a couple of comments. So first of all, there was a public comment regarding sales tax. And I just remind the public that the community, the buyer pays the sales tax, not the business. Sales tax is paid if you walk in, you buy a piece of clothing, the extra sales tax gets charged straight through to the consumer and the consumer pays it, not the business. So I don't have as much of a concern that somehow the sales tax that we passed is hurting business, have a way to transfer that off. And I agree that it does not seem fair that a small business is paying the same as a large business. And that's what we have right now. Everybody's paying $100. And I think that's what we're trying to fix here, is to make it more equitable. And there's always going to have to be lines of division. So they may seem somewhat arbitrary, but I think given the fact that 93% of our businesses will be in the lower two tiers, that's probably reasonable. And I actually think that combining both of them into one measure is fine. And the reason is that these measures are a lot of work, and we're going to have to ask the public and the business communities to help us pass these. So, you have to set up 2 FPPCs, you got to get 2 numbers, you got to run 2 campaigns, 2 of everything. It's hard enough to do 1, let alone 2. And so my strong recommendation would be to consolidate into 1. And the polling seems favorable on it, and move forward with a combined, which is, I guess, recommendation B.
Let's try that again. Thank you, Councilmember Colson. Councilmember Beach.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And again, I appreciate staff's hard work and our consultants, and appreciate that given the timelines of our discussion, rising inflation, the COVID business climate and everything. These are, this is where we arrived. I understand how we got here, but I continue to reflect on our conversation, reviewing the meeting minutes and our conversation in April. My main concern sort of echoes what 2 of the public commenters brought up tonight. It's the fairness and equity aspect of it, the difference between personal services that are struggling, or a retail business with 2 full-timers and 2 part-timers paying basically the same as a mega business on the bayfront of a tech industry. That what we were, I know this business tax is a little better than what we currently have by putting in 3 tiers, but it still doesn't solve the problem that we were trying to achieve of truly making it fair and equitable. And our consultants told us the way to really achieve that is through gross receipts. And, we didn't really have time to tinker it and make it something that we could all get our heads around. But I am concerned that we're going to have, I think in the April presentation, it talked about like a small, what was the term? A small craft business that could have up to $20,000 of gross receipts, or a $250,000 gross receipts, paying $200 a year. And yet a tech business on our bayfront that has $1 billion of revenue a year is paying $750. So the delta is $500. Or a future biotech business that's $1 billion of revenue is only paying $750. I think, the long story short, I think we can do better if we take a little bit more time on it. I do favor option C, which would be the cannabis tax. Let's get that done. But I think in my opinion, playing the long game, it would be in our best interest to take a little bit more time and to sit down at the table with our business community over the next year or even 2 and try to hammer out a gross receipts strategy that would be palatable and fair and equitable, and see if we can make something work that we can pass at a time where the business climate is a little bit better in a year or two, and really fix that long-term problem. That would be my preference. And I think the reason it's so important is that some of those businesses that really are larger do have a tremendous impact on our city, on the infrastructure, but they didn't necessarily build the development. They have a lot of employees. They are not necessarily paying impact fees. They're not necessarily doing retail. So the business tax is an important way that they can help give back to the community. So I think if we could modernize it and really get it right, and work with the business community on that, I think that would be my preference. I think we could invest the time, but let's get the cannabis tax done, option C. That would be my preference at this point.
Okay, so to be clear, then you were saying that we would leave the business license tax at $100 until we're able to put this back on the ballot in the next few years?
Until we can really craft a gross receipts, which is what our consultant said is the modern way to approach it, and it's more fair and equitable, or reassess what kind of a tax we want to go back to the ballot. To Councilmember Colson's point, it's a huge effort to go to the ballot and ask the voters for revenue. So let's get something that's really meaningful, and let's take a little bit more time, but let's get the cannabis done now. That's my opinion.
Very good. Councilmember O'Brien.
Yes, so I actually would like to go with option B. I think we've been discussing this business license tax for quite some time and had input from the businesses. So I would like, to move forward with it. I would like the verbiage changed in regards to the cannabis that I mentioned earlier. And I agree with actually Councilmember Colson, because the first thing I thought is if you do two separate taxes, it's a lot of work, and it's going to be very hard to get people to campaign and walk and raise money for two different taxes when you can combine it in one. I think they're relatively self-explanatory. And if there is a concern about the cannabis and how that works, we can, the committee, whatever committees formed, they can, elaborate on that verbiage with their brochures and mailers and so forth. So it's easier to understand. When you're looking at the ballot, yes, you only have the 75 words there. So it's hard to be super specific or super general. But at least with the brochures and stuff, if the committee feels that there needs to be a little more explanation in regards to that cannabis tax, they're able to do so in that venue.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Brien. Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think I'll get behind whatever consensus we have here, because I can see it both ways. I will say that for me, I thought Councilman Beach's comments were pretty compelling, that we could get the cannabis tax done in this cycle and really explain it properly, and then wait 2 years for a business license tax that makes sense. And I definitely can see the benefits of that, because doing this particular business I understand everyone's frustrated. It hasn't been raised since 1993, and it is frustrating. And actually, as a parenthetical comment, I made a comment to Mr. Godby. I personally, no matter which one of these we do, if we do the business license, I really think it makes it a stronger argument if we include 4 words: last increased in 1993. And I would get rid of undergrounding power lines, but maybe there are other ways. I think that is so much more compelling in terms of why we're raising rates right after COVID. I do take comfort from Councilwoman Colson's comments, which I'm sure are right, that this language is not going to be how people make their minds up. So I do take that point. But still, I would love to see us, if we do a business license ordinance, I would love to see us include it has not been increased since, or not last increased in 1993. I do emphatically believe we need to have the cannabis tax on here. That is one of the reasons we debated and approved allowing delivery services, was because we saw it as a revenue measure. And I would just point out that the million that's estimated is, as the city manager says, that's one business. It could be up to 3 to 4 million over time. And for a city with, a $70 million general fund, that is a meaningful amount of money. And so to conclude, I can go with B or C. I would love to see us include, if we do B, I'd love to see us include, it hasn't been raised in 20 whatever years, 27 years, but I do take the point that maybe, since we don't exactly know how the reporting is going to work and so forth, that, I could also see punting for 2 years and taking 2 bites at the apple. So sorry, it's a little bit wishy-washy this time, but I do think there are hard issues to think through strategically.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. Councilmember Colson.
Thank you. So as a sort of former small business owner in town, this council, if we're, really worried about businesses, I think, we raised minimum wage in the middle of COVID, and that was a very big impact on a lot of very small businesses in this community. This is a much, much smaller amount of money than it is to filter through the minimum wage increase through all of your employees. I mean, I know just on my business, even with 5 or 6 employees, it was like $20,000-$30,000 a year more to deal with that kind of an increase. But so I think that the businesses, when you look at the services that we provide to the businesses, the, cleaning of the downtown, the keeping the streets nice, the plants, the flowers, everything, the police, the safety, that's been I've probably called 20 businesses today to find out what they thought about this. And, everybody said, well, if this can help to keep the streets clean and, the police staffed and safer and the things that we all talked about, they were very behind it because those things do adversely impact their business. And the reality of it is that our financials may not entirely recover. And even if it's only an additional, 800,000 to 2 or 3 million a year, that's a significant amount of revenue that drops right to the bottom line to help us provide the good city services that people and businesses in this city want and like. So from my standpoint, when I looked at it as as a small business owner, to put another $100 or $150 into the till to keep the city stabilized and keep the good services that we provide still provided, it seems well worth it. And that was the general consensus that I got back from most people. And the fact that we didn't do a gross receipts tax had our business community, that is the number one reason that the Broadway bid endorsed this. They were like, it's not confusing, we can live with this, and we want to support the city and give back to a city and help you guys stabilize your revenues in a way that will allow you to keep providing the excellent services that we require, demand, and want. So personally, I would continue to push forward with B and just combine the two. I think we can get that. I think we can get that passed.
Okay, so we did discuss gross receipts. The consultant brought the gross receipts model for us. We discussed the different categories that it would require. We discussed the different amounts that they would do. We talked about it. We talked about equity. And one of the concerns was that the gross receipts doesn't make them all the same because there's some people who have very low margins and some people have very high margins. And we had a business owner who came in and told us about what that gross receipts model would do to him. And I found that there was a problem. So this is not nilly-willy that we're here today with this proposal. We went through all those options. We discussed them. As a group, we came up with this. We actually even considered a higher tier for the bigger businesses. And we decided as a group that that was too complicated and that we were going to try to keep it simple so that when we put the measure through, it would be easier to pass. Now, I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that we arrived this after a lot of discussion. It wasn't just, this is actually contrary to what the consultant proposed. The consultant wanted to do the gross receipts. We did consider that. We did talk about it a lot, and this is where we are. So I just want to make sure that the public is not left with the impression that we didn't consider it and that that this is the only option we consider. No, this was a compromise we arrived at to make it palatable to the voters and to make it acceptable to the business community. And I'm, for one, I just want to make sure that everybody's clear with that. Councilmember Brownrigg. Michael, you're muted.
I'm so sorry, I beg your pardon. I agree with you, Mr. Mayor, and I would add that adopting, proposing this tax, and if it were to be adopted, doesn't preclude a future city council from revisiting the business tax structure and making further amendments. So I do support, I will support B. I am worried, as I said a few minutes ago, less about the amount of money that's going to be charged to people and more about the paperwork that goes behind it. So I look forward very much to that reporting. I'd like to understand how that is actually going to be what people are going to be required to do. I do want to make one side comment with respect to Gerald's comments. I think what he was trying to say, which is, sorry for the background noise, which is accurate, is that his particular products pay a lot of tax already. And that's true. So like in California, every bottle of spirits has about $2 of excise taxes built into it. So he, I think, was saying he's paying tax on tax. I think that's probably true. I don't think there's any way to prevent it. But I think that's what he was getting at, was the fairness of his particular sector. So just to make that point. But I will support B. I would love to see us get in there. The business licenses has not been increased since 1993. Last increased in 1993.
I think that's a good point. And I think your points about the mechanics are well taken. I think that it's important that we address those, and hopefully we'll have some answers for our next meeting. Councilmember Beach.
I appreciate Vice Mayor's thoughts and even the idea and that it hasn't been increased since 1993. And the thought that a future council could make additional changes. I just think that that's kind of unrealistic. This is our bite at the apple to fix the business license tax. If we raise the lowest tier to $200 with the inflation escalator, the equivalent of $100, it's basically in 1993, that's the equivalent of what we're doing today. $200 is the equivalent of $100 in 1993. So we're basically doing the same thing that they did 30 years ago and improving it a little bit by adding 2 other tiers. But it's not really fixing the issue that I certainly, I think we all had hoped we would tackle a little bit more aggressively here. So I think it's unrealistic to think in 2 to 5 years we're going to put another business tax revision on the ballot. There'll be other battles to fight at that point. So this is our chance.
Right. Okay. So I think at this point we have, I think, consensus. There's 4 of us that are in favor of option B. Is that correct, colleagues?
That's correct. So what we need to do is figure out the ballot question for option B. I might ask Brian if you wouldn't mind coming back on and respond. So if we add non-retail, that's 2 words. We could take out cannabis or marijuana and just go with one of those, which means we're still 1 word over. Brian did do polling around the 1993 question, and it didn't poll all that high, but he can explain that better than I can. If you want to just if you recall, Brian, what was in the polling results.
Yeah, let me just check that real quick. It was in our second tier, as I recall. Let me just verify that, sorry.
So all of the fixing streets, sidewalks, enhancing police patrols and crime prevention, undergrounding power lines, that was all in the top tier of things that most resonated with people.
Right.
If I could just interject, because I had this conversation once already.
Right.
I remember how it polled. But where I think it's helpful is in rebutting negative campaigning. In other words, very much like the comment we got, how can you do this coming out of COVID? It's so unfair. The best way for anybody wanting to vote for this, the best rebuttal isn't, we need better sidewalks. It's, we haven't raised this, or at least one very strong rebuttal is we haven't raised this since 1993. And I will say that the reason I believe that even more so is because you, Madam City Manager, used that point in making the presentation.
I had more than 75 words.
Yeah, 75 words is a different issue, but it did test in second tier. Now, that's not necessarily bad. The wording was the measure will update a 30-year-old business license structure so that it's fair to all locally owned businesses. So it's a lot of words. It was about 69%, that wording, at least somewhat more likely to support the measure. So while it's second tier, it's still well above a simple majority. So I think there is a benefit to that. Then the question becomes, how do we fit it into the 75 words and doing this, on the fly. We have the clause ranging from 200 to 700 for most businesses. There's three words there, most businesses that we could potentially eliminate.
I think the most businesses, I think the qualifier most was added because some will pay those two, 1 to 4 businesses will pay the 5% gross receipts tax. So I think that's why that got put in. Yeah. I wonder, rather than doing this on the fly, Mike, and I know Councilmember Colson has a point to make, but I wanted to ask Michael, do we have to settle on the language of this tonight, or can we come up with some options working with Brian offline?
Yes, we can do that. We don't have to settle on the ballot question tonight. The only action that the council should take tonight is to choose which of the options to, option A, B, or C to choose. And then we can come back at a later time with the actual ballot question for that approval.
Great, thank you.
And I think I think we've determined that we're going with B. I think that we have a consensus on that. So as far as the issues, I think it's important that we hear what concerns council has so that you guys can go draft something with it. So with that, I'm going to give it to Council Member Colson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just point out that there is also the likelihood that there will be a rebuttal argument. So as you know, most likely, oftentimes the GAN people come out with sort of standard language. So if there's a rebuttal argument, in that rebuttal argument, which would also be in the ballot measure, you could list in the 1993 in there as one of the sort of continuing arguments. So if you just can't get it whittled down, you get a little second shot there with the rebuttal.
Well, you get two, right? Because you get an argument in favor and you get a rebuttal to the opposed.
Right.
Yes. So
this
we
is
could
the ballot
have
question, so you get two. That's right.
Right. So in the ballot materials that would come out, you would have, you'll have those couple bites of the apple to clarify a few things. And then I also just, I was thinking about this more in terms of, I think another reason I think this is right to do it in two is I kind of flipped it around and looked at it the other way. I think cannabis is a no-brainer. We get that done. But if we're going to do all the work to do cannabis, do a little bit of work to fix the start of the business tax. Otherwise, you're doing cannabis and then you're still doing the business tax in 2 years. So you're still doing twice the work. This way you get it going. And if in 2 years, people don't have the capacity to do an additional, additional work, at least you've got it sort of, you've got a little more equitable in this iteration. So those are just two comments regarding process that I've understood over the years.
Thank you. Council Member O'Brien.
Yes, I still would like to see if we can, if it can be reworded and come back with a couple options of the wording, because I do think Vice Mayor Brown brings up a good point. I mean, it's been, 27 years since it's been increased, and I think that's something that should be kind of shouting when people are reading. So I think it's still worth the seeing a couple options, and then we can go from there. And I also just want to iterate in regards to the gross receipts. We already vetted that. And so if we already vetted it once, I'm not sure if that's really going to change. And actually the taxes were higher in general. So I still would like to see us proceed with option B, have us, give us the opportunity to look at the variety of wordsmithing, and then, make that decision with the wordsmithing at the subsequent council meeting.
Okay, just to be clear, colleagues, back to the wordsmithing, the issues we have is the retail on the cannabis and the time. This hasn't been adjusted since 19, whatever that date was.
93.
Correct? Or is there something,
93.
or is there something else that we need to, does anybody have any other issues that they want to raise?
I think you got them both. We have to add the non-retail or something similar, and the last raise in 1993 or some variation of, and we'll provide you with options that have the 1993 and not, because that's forwards. So maybe taking out one of the undergrounding power lines or something else to put in the 93. So we'll work with Brian and Joy, our consultant. We have a meeting set up with them next week, so we can chat about it with them and bring you some options.
Right.
And sorry, Mr. Mayor, you will also circulate then the reporting requirements for gross receipts, so that
I will put that into the next staff report so that the public gets a chance to see it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Great. With that, staff, you have enough from us?
I think I do.
I'm sorry, Mr. City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what you should do then at this point is entertain a motion to bring back the preferred option for adoption at a future meeting, and then directing the clerk to publish the summary 5 days before the proposed adoption.
Very good. I think my colleagues were trampling over each other to do just that. Colleagues?
Go for it, Vice Mayor.
I'm happy to make a motion to ask the clerk to publish the proposed ordinance and to bring back the language for review by the city council along the lines of option B, proposing to revise the business license tax and to create a gross receipts tax for cannabis delivery services, or however we define them. Is that adequate, Mr. City Attorney? Thank you.
It is. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Very good. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
So we have a motion by Vice Mayor Brownrigg and a second by Councilmember O'Brien. Madam City Clerk, if we could have a roll call.
Councilmember O'Brien? Aye. Councilmember Beach?
No.
Councilmember Coulson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brownrigg?
Yep.
Mayor Ortiz?
Yep. So with that, thank you all. That was good discussion, good points that were brought up. And Mr. Godby, appreciate your input, and staff, everybody. It was a lot of work, and I'm glad to see we're moving forward. Thank you very much. And with that, we are moving on to item number 10A, which is a consideration of appointments to our Library Board of Trustees. Madam City Clerk, I believe that's you.
Nope.
No?
That's
Madam
me.
City Manager.
So we are filling 2 impending vacancies on the library board, and those are due to the expiring terms of trustees Elizabeth Ostrow and Danielle Garcia. We did our usual dance of publicizing the vacancies, sending notification letters to past commission applicants. You received 6 applications as of the deadline. You interviewed those 6 folks. It was Danielle Garcia, Jill Goldsmith, Denise Kensky, Marissa McGinnis, Elizabeth Ostrow, and Robin Montoya. So for those who looked at the packet online, we had neglected to include Ms. Montoya. We apologize for that. So if you could text your choices to the city clerk, remember it's for 2, and the appointed term is a 3-year term starting the end of this month and ending in 2025.
Thank you.
And we need to open it for public comment as well.
Very good. So let's go ahead and open up for, first of all, colleagues, anybody have questions for staff? Nothing. So we'll open up to public comment, please.
I have no emails and no one has their hand up.
Thank you. With that then, colleagues, if we could just text our selection to the city clerk, that'd be great. And Megan Lee, let me know when you're ready.
Okay. Councilmember O'Brien, Elizabeth, and Danielle. Councilmember Beach, Danielle, and Elizabeth. Councilmember Colson, Elizabeth, and Danielle. Vice Mayor Brownrigg, Elizabeth, and Danielle, and Mayor Ortiz, Elizabeth, and Danielle.
Right, so that sounds pretty unanimous to me. So thank you very much. And thank you to Elizabeth and Danielle for your continued service, and to the other candidates. Man, we had once again, just a wonderful group of people, and it's just painful to let them walk away. So we will be contacting you and trying to find other ways for you to contribute. So thank you for putting your hat in the ring. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you soon. So with that, yes, I'm sorry. There you go. With that, we will move on to, unless comments, you have any colleagues, any other one have a comment? No. Very good. We'll move on to item number 11, which is council committees, activities, reports, and announcements. I do see that Vice Mayor Brownrigg submitted a report. Does anybody else have any announcements or any reports they'd like to share? And I don't see any. So with that, we will move on to acknowledgements. We do have the minutes for various commissions online, if you'd like to access them. And colleagues, do we have anybody we'd like to acknowledge in our adjournment? Do we have anybody? No. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight, and we are adjourned. Thank you.